Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world, and many thanks for that introduction. I welcome you to our panel today on transparency and inclusive co-management for sustainable fisheries in Africa. And I want to say a special thank you to the European Commission and the European Development Days for hosting this entire series of very important events. As you heard, my name's Steve Trent. I'm the co-founder and CEO at the Environmental Justice Foundation, and I'll be your moderator. EGF has organised this event jointly with our colleagues at WWF, and we are very pleased to welcome you. By way of a short introduction, I want to make a few comments. As I'm sure you're aware, our seas and oceans are under an acute and increasing pressure from multiple threats, ranging from global heating to plastic pollution. But central among these threats is illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing, which together with unsustainable fishing is pushing more and more fisheries around the world to commercial extinction and collapse. And this has devastating consequences both for the marine ecosystems, but also for the many millions of people who depend upon these fisheries for food, security, income and livelihoods. As the UN Food and Agriculture Organization notes in its 2020 report on the state of the world's fisheries, in excess of 90% of the planet's fish stocks that have been studied are now either fully exploited, overexploited, or in decline. Since modern industrial fishing began its rapid expansion in and around the 1950s, we've witnessed the decline and loss of about 90% of the world's large ocean species, such as cod, halibut, and swordfish. But I think it's very important that we remember that today, fish constitutes 17% of all animal protein humans consume. In least developed countries, this number increases to over 25%, and in some coastal communities, it makes up 80% of animal protein consumed. Put simply, healthy, vibrant, and truly sustainable fisheries are essential to food security and livelihoods for a vast number of people, many of whom live in poorer, lower income countries with few other options. I would say in particular, women who play an outsized role in fisheries, particularly once the catches have been landed, are most often among those impacted first and worst by unsustainable and illegal fishing, facing serious threats from a lack of food security and employment opportunities in coastal communities. In West Africa, where we are very lucky to have a speaker from today, illegal fishing by largely foreign industrial fleets is rife. 6.7 million people depend directly on fisheries for food and livelihood, and losses to IUU stand at around $2.3 billion annually. So these are just some of the reasons why we must work quickly with ambition to eradicate IUU, working in close cooperation with all stakeholders, and specifically including the coastal communities who are so well placed to understand, support and manage those fisheries. It is my clear view that central to doing this is the compelling need to deliver transparency across supply chains, building in simple, cost-effective tools into the architecture of fisheries management so that we can see who is fishing for what, where, when, and how. And this, in turn, can enable us to support the good actors and get rid of the bad. So, to shed light on what other actions can be taken to combat illegal and unsustainable fishing, we are very lucky today to have a truly expert high-level panel of great experience. I'm very pleased to welcome with us today Ambassador Jobst van Geertman, head of the EU delegation to the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire. Welcome, Ambassador. Ms. Sunitha Jagannathan, an independent marine biologist and young leader who has been doing incredible work with artisanal fishing communities in coastal India. My colleague, Mr. Nana Jojo Solomon, executive member of the Ghana National Canoe Fishermen's Council, and a powerful advocate for local fishing communities in Ghana. And last but definitely not least, Ms. Alice Rueza, WWF's regional director leading WWF's work on the African continent across a broad spectrum of critical issues, including climate, forests, and fisheries. So a big welcome to our panelists. Now, before introducing a short film to set the scene, I just want to say, please do send in your questions for the panel. Keep them short, identify yourself and note who your question is for. I will ask one question of each panelist, time permitting, as they finish their speech, but then open to you. We want to make this interactive. We want to get your thoughts, your opinions, your views, so please do send them in. So now, without any further delay, I would like to introduce our session with a short film. If we could show the film now, thank you very much.
Around the world, fish populations are being driven to the brink of collapse by illegal fishing and overfishing, with devastating consequences for marine life and the millions of people who depend on it for their survival. In West Africa, 6.7 million people depend directly on fisheries for their food and livelihoods. Yet, an estimated 1 in every 3 fish is caught by illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing practices.
There's a rampage of IU fishing. When the trawlers start coming in and drift in our areas of fishing, they depleted the whole fish stock.
Illegal operators rely on lax regulation and weak governance to steal with impunity, leaving the poorest communities most at risk. And the lack of transparency is allowing these vessels to sail under the radar. To stop this, we need an urgent shift towards transparency in African waters and beyond. And the good news is that we already have the tools to make this happen. EJF's Charter for Transparency outlines transformative solutions that governments and industry must adopt to bring an end to the destruction of marine ecosystems. Simple, low-cost measures like publishing lists of fishing licenses, making vessel tracking data public, and sanctioning those involved in illegal fishing would revolutionize the global fishing industry. And crucially, the communities that depend on fisheries for their survival should be at the forefront of this fight. EJF and WWF work with coastal fishing communities across Africa to encourage collaborative control over their own fisheries. For example, equipping them with inexpensive technologies such as smartphones and geotagged cameras that allow them to identify and report illegal fishing activities. In Liberia, where 80% of the population depend on fish as a primary source of protein, EJF has helped small-scale fishers successfully campaign to protect their waters and gather evidence that can be used by the Liberian government to catch and sanction illegal operators. With communities in charge of their own resources, local fishers have reported a reduction in illegal fishing and in turn, an increase in catches and income.
Yesterday, I saw a species that over 10 years we'll haven't seen. They are now coming.
Small-scale fishers are best placed to act as custodians of the resources they rely on, scaling up the capacity of local environmental defenders alongside greater transparency across African waters will protect precious marine ecosystems for generations to come.
Now, as our first speaker, we will briefly step away from the focal point of African waters, but staying with fisheries and what can be done to empower fishing communities. Please welcome the brilliant and inspiring biologist and young leader, Sunitha Jagannathan. Sunitha, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the wonderful introduction, Steve. As Steve mentioned, my name is Sunitha, and I'm from India. I'm a marine biologist working towards habitat restoration in the eastern coast of India. And I've also been selected to be one of the young leaders in this amazing event today. So I'm really excited to be a part of EDD 2021, not only because I get to share this amazing platform with so many experts, but also because I share a very close connection to the city of Brussels. I had arrived here at your host city back in 2015 to complete my master's. Fast forward 2 years to 2017 when I completed my education, and I decided to return home to India to pursue a career in marine conservation. I came home with bright eyes, filled with hope and optimism, and most importantly, idealism. I truly believed that I would be the one saving the oceans of India. So the work that I do largely is on restoring marine habitats, using low-cost, locally sourced solutions such as artificial reefs. I sincerely believe that restoration efforts need to focus a little more on involving people within our work rather than solely focusing on perfecting the technology behind artificial reefs. By using concrete, for example, as a substrate, reefs can naturally repopulate with native marine biodiversity. I know because I've seen this happen myself. Now, over the years, as my work progressed, I realized that despite my education and my status of being a marine biologist, my theoretical knowledge was starkly different from the on-ground realities faced by coastal communities today. I had no idea about the risks involved in fishing or what it was like to have my livelihood threatened by large-scale events like climate change. Of course, in these situations, my biggest teachers were members from the fishing communities that I was working with. People who had such an intimate knowledge of ocean systems that they can be considered as marine ecologists and oceanographers themselves. Now, all of this restoration work that I hope to do is quite meaningless and frankly quite a waste of time and money if we don't ensure that sustainable fishing is practiced in these regions. Simply designing an artificial reef, identifying a location and deploying this reef does not guarantee marine habitat restoration. Ecological succession at an artificial reef is a very long and slow process. Reefs that are on the path of being restored are young and dynamic ecosystems. And this is what makes them very vulnerable to overfishing. This is also why we need sustainable fishing regulations that recognize these ecological processes and addresses them. Of course, we all here know that conservation cannot operate in silos. We need timely collaboration between biologists and experts in fisheries to frame policies for fishing in restored regions. However, I'm very careful when I say this because I don't believe that the intellectual elite alone should be the ones making these decisions. While there's already interdisciplinary collaborations between marine biologists and fisheries experts across the world, another key stakeholder to involve here are fishing communities. People who have been in the ocean for generations and whose generations of wisdom and hands-on knowledge can work as powerful tools in our journey. Now, when I speak of involving fishing community members, I don't speak of just involving them in the on-ground projects that we conduct as community managers or as liaisons. We need to involve members from the fishing community and people who work along the fisheries supply chain, and not just within our on-ground projects, but at decision-making spaces. Fishing regulations affect the jobs and income of thousands of people across the world, especially in developing countries like mine. People whose livelihood is at stake here need a seat at these tables, and they really need to represent themselves. Now, I'd like to conclude my rather short speech today by answering a question that us young leaders are asked one too many times, which is, what is your vision for the future? If you ask me that question, this is what I'd say. I hope one day I don't have this job. I really hope that one day there is no longer a need for a marine conservationist, because everybody along the coast is a conservationist in their own right, championing their own cause towards the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunitha. I'd like to ask you a very particular question briefly, if you will allow me, in response to that. And it's quite simple. It's what role do you see that the large international agencies, many of which are participating in the European Development Days and who may indeed be watching this panel today, what role can they play in enabling your ambition, your vision for the future to put you out of a job? How can they help you realize your vision?
Thank you for that question, Steve. I think it's really important to address given our wide audience today. So I feel that in developing countries like India and so many countries, I'm sure in Africa as well, the ground realities faced by these coastal communities are best understood by people who work in or belong to these communities. And if not that, at least people who belong to that country. Often, conservation and sustainability measures implemented by expert teams from the global north, they have excellent scientific and sociological impact. But what they lack is a cultural context. In order for us to effectively work towards sustainability of the oceans and conservation, we need to partner. What I would request is for international agencies to partner with local organizations, local conservationists, and local community leaders on an equal footing so that we can jointly achieve our common goal together.
Thank you very much, Sunitha. So we will, as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be coming back to you, the audience, to ask questions of the panel. But before doing that, I'm going to move through our speakers. And so I would like to now invite Mr. Nana Jojo Solomon to give your short presentation. Over to you, Mr. Solomon.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to state our case in Ghana. The small-scale fisheries takes care or provides livelihood for over 2.7 million Ghanaians along the value chain, and also gives direct employment to over 140,000 fishers across the country, at the four coastal regions of the country. Like we know, fisheries is the main source of employment, and that's for job security, food security, and ultimately for national security. I mean, fisheries is very important in this area. The small-scale fishers normally concentrate on the small pelagics, which is normally referred to as the people's fish across the world. And that is the sole preserve of the small-scale fisheries. Unfortunately, this area of fisheries is confronted with a steady decline for over 15 to 20 years now because of the illegal activities of the industrial trawl vessels. I would also want to state emphatically here that no trawl vessel in Ghana has been registered or licensed to do mid-water or surface fishing where these people's fish are found. But unfortunately, as if it is an illegal, as if it is legal, these industrial trawl vessels continuously over the past 15 to 20 years have been landing these small pelagics, and it's a source of worry. Because of that, the small-scale fisheries has witnessed a steady decline over the years, and it's now on the verge of total collapse. And thinking about the fact that we have about 2.7 million Ghanaians who depend on the fishery, if this source of job security breaks down, then I think, and which of course we're nearly there, it's a source of worry to everybody. Apart from the fact that the employment of the artisanal fishers is on the verge of collapse, we also have constant issues of incursions like the industrial trawl vessels, fishing within the 30-meter inshore exclusive zone where it's designed for artisanal fishers, and therefore they run down these small wooden canoes. They also destroy the gears, and most often lives and property are lost as a result. Again, the problem that confronts us as small-scale fishers is the fact that these cheap and poor quality fish is flooded on the fish market, so that if these small-scale fishers land their small catches, they are forced to sell it at giveaway prices, and therefore, our women are now into serious debt with the banks, and the fishermen themselves are out of jobs already, and right now it looks like something must seriously be done. Government has now taken a positive step, to address the issue now with the gazetting of the community-based co-management policy. I think we will see some amount of transparency, because both the fishers and the regulators will manage the people and the stocks, and therefore I think it's a positive step now. And then we've started also putting in place the close season, annual close season regime, which very soon, I think this year will start on 1st July and end on 31st July for the small-scale fishers, and then 1st July to 31st August for the industrial trawlers, which for me I think is a good step in the right direction. But over and above, I think we have one of the 5 fisheries laws, and we believe that the security agencies like the Navy, the Marine Police, the Fisheries Enforcement Unit, can also up their game, step up, the enforcement of the laws. Thank God now we have a minister who is prepared to go all out enforcing the fisheries laws, and we have also pledged our support in that direction. So I think for now, we should look at it from a global perspective, that Ghana alone as a country cannot be able to address these issues unless we have the support of a platform like this, where the European Union, the USAID, and other advanced countries who have made success stories can also step in. So I think for now, this is the state of our fisheries. Again, I believe that in as much as we are addressed as small-scale fishers, we are 2.7 million, and therefore we are also sure to tell the platform that in spite of how small we are too big, to be ignored, and therefore we cannot afford to fail. And so we also need the support of the international community to reverse this trend that confronts the small-scale fishers in Ghana. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solomon. Can I ask you just one very quick question, and if forgive me, ask for a brief reply.
Okay.
What would you like to see the international community, the European Union and others do to help local communities and the small-scale artisanal fishers that you represent have a role in combating illegal and unsustainable fishing? Is there a simple action or set of actions they could take?
I believe so. I think the international community, of course, the ocean we see out here behind our windows are governed by an international convention, and therefore they are laws of the sea. And that is not the sole preserve of the government of Ghana. And therefore, when things are done, the wrong way, I think the international community has the trump card to step into it and then be able, because like we're saying, we have all the laws. You understand that we have all the laws, we have the security agencies and all. So I believe that with the proactive presence of the international community will be able to see some sanity within the setup. So I believe that that is the role the international community can contribute towards sustaining the fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan. I would now, without wasting any more of our precious time, simply like to invite WWF's African Regional Director, Alice Rueza, to give her presentation. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you very much, ADD, for having me here today. I'm very excited to share some experiences from WWF's work in coastal East Africa. So before I get to the subject of transparency, I think let me talk about the context. In a world where fishing resources are increasingly coveted and marine habitats face threats posed by climate change and human activity, every country, both the African coastal states and the European Union, must take their responsibilities to achieve sustainable fisheries. Marine ecosystems, as you know no borders, so regional cooperation is extremely important. Now, we've heard the figures about how many people depend on fisheries. We had the Liberia figures, the Ghana figures, but in Africa, it's approximately 200 million people who depend on protein from fish. And the sector supports the livelihoods of 12.3 million people, of which more than 1/4 are female, and who are often considered to be the poorest and most marginalized groups. However, these resources are facing increasing threats, pressure, and one of the main obstacles for this is the IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Illegal fishing not only contributes to overfishing, but it is responsible for millions of dollars stolen each year from the economies. For instance, in Mozambique, it is estimated at $35 million a year. African countries are among the most targeted by illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing due to insufficient fisheries monitoring, transparency, and governance in the region. For example, a forthcoming study by WWF and others has found that SADC, the Southern Africa Development Community, and East African countries have less than 50% of what is expected to be best practice of their fisheries information publicly available on national authority websites. Data on beneficial owners who are really benefiting from activities, as well as data on fisheries subsidies and small-scale fisheries, are the least reported. The report shows that only 15% of this is reported. The report also found that no country showed improvement in the amount and quality of data shared compared to 2016. The results of this study will be released soon and will be shared. Now, not knowing how much is caught for fisheries managers who won't take the fully informed decisions that can in turn lead to serious threats in terms of food security. Because without this data, they cannot make these informed decisions. In the Indian Ocean region, furthermore, artisanal small-scale fisheries make up for 50% of the tuna catches, and without reporting requirements, they go unmonitored. Therefore, efforts also have to be made locally. But for this, we need capacity. The main challenge, of course, is not the tools, because the tools exist, but it's also the capacity and the political will of our own governments to implement cost-effective measures to reduce IUU fishing and enforce legal instruments. So what do we think are the solutions? One of those solutions has been mentioned today by many people, and it is obviously inclusive co-management with coastal communities. I think Sunitha talked about the fact that we need to involve communities in these decision-making. Now, a strong feature in African small-scale fisheries is our ability to organize for co-management and self-governance. And this is an area that we at WWF have focused on in coastal East Africa. We have been engaging with community organizations and associations in monitoring, control, and surveillance. And we have developed a data collection center in Kenya. Through a mobile application, these community organizations in 97 sites are engaged in collection and reporting of data to relevant authorities. Now, this has enabled these authorities to undertake robust analysis for determining catch per unit effort and also abundance estimates. Moreover, through co-management and participatory approaches, we are seeing coastal communities now start to engage more in policy and in coastal protection and conservation, and through application of minimum terms and conditions, and even in access agreements. We've also helped at WWF, we've also worked with CSOs to develop platforms. For example, the Swallow Tuna has recently submitted an expression of interest to the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission on being admitted as observers. This is a great development as well. At the regional level, we are also sharing more information and making this information public on who is fishing where and what is essential. WWF has also been working with the Southern Africa Development Community Secretariat in creating conditions for the establishment of a Fisheries Monitoring, Control and Surveillance Coordination Center, which will be based in Maputo, Mozambique. This is key. This center will be key in sharing information and improving data collection at the regional level. The center, which will be coordinated with other regional organizations such as the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission and Indian Ocean Commission, will promote collaboration and exchange of fisheries information between these countries and partners to improve the sustainable use of fisheries resources, combat IUU fishing, and increase economic benefits. However, a lot remains to be done, and we do need to continue to build capacity. Our recent report launched in the Indian Ocean shows that unregulated fishing has continuously been overlooked compared to the illegal unreported fishing. And it is conducted, obviously, in places where no framework exists or where it's bound by regional management systems. The report also found that many of the countries are suffering from regulatory gaps, both in geographical areas and the species they cover, resulting in more unregulated fishing. Squid fishing, for example, in one unregulated area grew by 83% in just 5 years, while species such as sharks have no regulatory frameworks for monitoring and protection and are becoming more and more endangered. So action is required by our member countries and the relevant regional fisheries management organizations to close these regulatory gaps, as well as by key market states like the EU to ensure that imports do not contribute to the collapse of marine populations that are vital to our ocean health and, of course, undermine the livelihoods of our communities. We know that the European Union is currently undergoing a programming process for the new Global Europe Instrument, and it will be essential that these priorities are also reflected in the EU regional programs for Sub-Saharan Africa, especially in the new programs that are being developed. I will close now. I will close there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alice. If I could just ask you one very quick question. You've answered some of it, but given that information exchange is so important in driving sustainability, combating illegal fishing and such, what role do you think the international agencies and other stakeholders can have in building information exchange across the African region as a means to combat IUU? Do you have anything else you'd like to say on those points?
Yes, I mean, I think I've talked about the new center that WWF is working with the SADC, Southern Africa Development Community, with support from Germany and others in creating conditions for the establishment of these fisheries monitoring, control and center. And I think we would like to really see that this center is supported with capacity and the right technology so that we can continue monitoring this. But also importantly, I think one important point which was also made by Sunitha is the fact about empowering these community-based organizations to really be involved and be at the table when these decisions are made, so that they can really those who know the fishery well enough can contribute to the policies.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alice. Can I just encourage the audience before moving to our next speaker to send in any questions that you may have? And I would now like to welcome Ambassador Jobst Vodkerkman to give his presentation. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot also to the other participants and obviously to the audience that I can be part of such an important topic. I mean, as an ambassador of the EU in Côte d'Ivoire, this is part of my daily job, I must say, because we have heard in Africa, but in West Africa particular, we have very rich and abundant fishing grounds. And if I look at the neighboring countries, we have big ports. There's Tema, there's Abidjan, there's Dakar. But also, I must say, it's not only about fishing, because very often in Côte d'Ivoire, people are talking about the importance of transformation. So here we have also a sector where basically we have a lot of processing plants. Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, they produce actually and they transform then the fish for the EU market. Now, a word about Côte d'Ivoire, because I live there. It's the biggest port in West Africa. It's the third biggest African exporter of tuna after Mauritius and Seychelles. And only in Côte d'Ivoire, and we have heard that for all Africa, actually Fisheries stands for about 40, 50,000 direct jobs and 500,000 indirect jobs. So it's enormous. There's also a famous local plate actually people eat. It's the garba. It's prepared by women. And so you're obviously right when you say the fish is also a source of protein, animal protein supply for Côte d'Ivoire, but also for all the other countries. So what we want actually, we talked a lot about preservation of ecosystems, marine diversity, biodiversity. But what we really want also is that this sector, which is such an important sector, continues to play an important role. We don't want that to stop, right? So this is why we have all recognized the importance of the oceans. It's in the 2030 agenda. And I think the international community is absolutely aligned to regulate harvesting and to end overfishing, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. The EU strategy identifies it as well. And by the way, we have quite a lot of programs either in the fishery agreements or direct programs for West Africa, for the region, where we support structural changes. When sometimes people approach me and say, the EU gives a lot of money to pay for fish, but in reality, actually, most of the money goes into structural changes, methods of monitoring, surveillance, data analysis. That's where we really try to invest. But I must also say, it unfortunately goes on. If you look around, there's still a lot of fishing without a license. People are not really reporting the catches they make, or they make false reports. And then we have heard that as well. People are catching undersized fish, and that obviously then prohibits a population of fish to regenerate, and or they fish in closed areas. So it goes on. And this illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing actually depletes the fish stocks, destroys marine habitats, destroys competition, and also puts honest fishers at a disadvantage. And it weakens coastal communities, and that in particular in developing countries. Now, what role has the EU to play? I mean, we are the biggest importer of marine fish products. If I take Côte d'Ivoire, the EU buys over 90% of the tuna fish. And I was telling you earlier that's the biggest port for tuna fish in the region. So we play an important role because we are consuming that fish. And I must say, what gives me a little bit of hope is that the consumption in the EU has changed. The European citizen today want to consume a product which comes from a sustainable production, a value chain which doesn't pollute, doesn't deplete, and doesn't destroy. And that, by the way, is not only valid for fish, it's valid for almost all other products as well. You don't want to eat a fish and think about that this fish might be extinct, that fishermen live in poverty. You don't want that. And I think that's what the EU also got from their citizens as a message in the last European elections, when sustainability was a key topic. And as we are home to 500 million potential consumers, I think the EU has a major responsibility under international law in guaranteeing that Europeans have access to fishery products stemming from legal, reported, and regulated fishing activities. And it doesn't matter who fishes. Could be European vessels, could be third country vessels. But the fish our consumers are consuming should be really, let's say, not an EU fishing. But that's an uphill battle, I must also say. 37% of the capture of fish in the Gulf of Guinea is illegal. It's more than 1/3, and it's not easy for coastal countries to really crack down on it, because if you know, the Gulf of Guinea, for example, is not safe. 95% of all the piracy happens there, and that is why transparency is so key. It is absolutely essential that everybody is aware of the rules, that information is on those, let's say, fishing activities is easily accessible, that there are sanctions which are in place. Transparency is an absolute key. And I must say, I'm very proud that the EU gives an example that our fisheries agreements are indeed the most transparent in the world, because all documents are public. All activities are closely monitored with the European Parliament. Everybody can look at it. I must say, I see this myself very often, because we get a lot of critical questions from journalists. Just last week, I had Euronews here, then Ivorian television, and we are also criticized. But that's fine, because that's a cost we have to pay, because we are exposed to our own transparency. And as the documents are all available in public, well, I mean, anybody can analyze it, can look in that, can turn them around, and then can say, but that's not good. But it's fine, as I said, because it shows that we have a real comprehensive approach. And I must also say, what is the downside of it? It sometimes helps others to get away with more opaque setups, because people are concentrating on what they have access to, and these are our documents. So I can only say I would love to have all nations getting the same pressure as we are getting. And I can only encourage journalists as well to look into other fishery agreements. In Côte d'Ivoire, for example, look at a Chinese agreement. I haven't seen it. And I think it is important that this really takes place, and that all documents are accessible, so that we have a complete picture of what's going on. It cannot be done alone by the EU or by one country. Impossible. Let me also say a word about to ensure collaborative, inclusive approach, as we have discussed already and others were saying. I fully agree that fishermen have to be heard. I think that's absolutely crucial. But they also have to listen. And I myself, I went down to the port several times last week again, and I talked to fishermen. And if you listen to them, it's sometimes really dramatic. There are people fishing for 28 years, and they are telling me now we have to go out twice the time as we did before, and we get much less fish. So the business is really getting tougher. So I think we should look together with them how we can have a proper management plan. But it has also to be a scientific approach. It's not a thing which we can only do based on experience. I think we must really have data as well. And the other thing is, fishermen also must understand that they are the ones fishing, and therefore legal, regulated, and reported fishing can only be achieved through them. And I think that's absolutely crucial. Now, let me conclude by saying that the fight against EU fishing is a very serious issue, and it's a high priority for the EU. But first and foremost, it's not only a fight against IUU fishing, but it's a fight for an important cause. It's a fight for the preservation of livelihoods of fishermen and the preservation of fish stocks and ecosystems. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. If I could just ask you now a quick question. You raised some very important points there about transparency, and if I think I'm not misinterpreting it, you were saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. In that context, is there anything more that you particularly would like to see happening in West Africa, in the Gulf of Guinea, to resolve these problems? Is there anything that you think we're not doing now that we could and should be doing?
Yeah, well, I think very strongly that transparency should become the norm. I mean, of course, those who would like to be transparent, they can be transparent. It's much more complicated if you have countries who would like to prefer a more opaque setup. So we have, of course, not the power to impose agreements between our partners and their national fishery partners. On the other hand, we have an important market. And I think in the line with the priorities of the EU Commission, I think we can set standards and probably we can look into what enters into our single market. And again, that's independent where it's coming from our own vessels, from third-party vessels. So I think there is a market regulation which we can do. But I maybe think also that our agreements in the future could have an obligation of making data public available for our partners. And now, of course, I know that there are legal limitations to the publications of bilateral agreements by some parties. But I still think from a scientific perspective, I think we could have some more data available. And I think if all the vessels report their catches, I think that will be a major step forward, And finally, I also think there should be an incentive to transparency. So I think we should think a little bit more out of the box. If you talk about, let's say, if we help fishery countries or others help fishery countries, and this is public, that maybe is not considered a fishery subsidy. So I think we should think out of the box. What can we create as an incentive for transparency? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you will allow me to use my privilege and hopefully not abuse my privilege as the moderator today, one comment that I really do want to make is to praise and applaud the European Commission, indeed the European Union, for their leadership in combating IUU globally. I've worked in this sector for a long time, and I've seen firsthand at the most senior levels in government how the work done by the Commission has actually served to drive change. I know many will say the EU itself is not perfect in its fisheries management, but I think on this platform, this stage, I think it has been the single most important factor in driving action to combat IUU around the world. So I won't say more. This is not my platform, but I had to say that. We've had a few questions, which, if you will allow me, before asking each of you at the end of this, we have a few minutes to give your final key takeaway that you would like the audience to hear. But before that, I have a question which perhaps I can put to you, Sunitha. From your presentation, it was clear that you feel fishing communities must have a seat at the table and they need to be adequately represented, a view which I share very strongly. Do you have a sense of what the best mechanisms and tools are to ensure this? How can we make this consultation the norm rather than the exception? Have you got any examples of what might work?
Well, I am not fully aware of how this could happen in a governmental setup. I mostly work independently or with other NGOs. So my response would be limited to the philanthropic NGO sector. But coming from India itself, if you see, there is a huge class divide, right? And that exists across countries in the global south. Not everyone has access to the same quality of education. Not everyone had access to study abroad like how I did. So as Ms. Alice had also pointed out, we need better capacity building. And this needs to be targeted towards people who don't otherwise have access to as much education as the upper and middle classes do. So I do believe we need to target not just general education, but conservation-specific education to people from across different classes of society. And so then it would sort of ease their entry into the sector of conservation itself and help them work their way up to jobs like anybody else, but just help them with that first footing into the industry itself. And to give you an example, I don't have a concrete example, but I did work on a project back in 2019, pre-COVID, where I collaborated with an adventure sports company. And what we were doing was we were interacting with children from the local fishing village off the coast of Tamil Nadu. And what we were doing was we were giving them free lessons in water sports, because the adventure sports companies had excellent instructors as well. So the deal was we gave them free lessons in any water sport that they preferred: kayaking, stand-up paddling, windsurfing. And the payment was that they had to clean the beach. They had to give us a bag of trash each. So this was an easy way for them to increase their environmental literacy and understand a little more about various aspects of coastal and marine conservation. And at the same time, they were also being trained in skills that were not fishing, but still connected them to the ocean. So I think there are two sort of angles to this. One is to train people to enter the conservation sector itself. And secondly, also train members of the fishing community in skills that will enable them to find employment in livelihoods that connect them to the ocean, but does not need to be fishing itself, alternative livelihoods. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you very much. And because I'm really keen to hear also from Alice, because of your broad representation across the African continent. Do you have any key mechanisms or tools that you would like to bring to the table to ensure that there is true representation of the coastal communities, the artisanal fishers, and others who have a stake in this, who live within and depend upon fisheries?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. As I mentioned earlier, we, WWF, has been engaging with small community-based organizations in the monitoring, control, and surveillance here in Kenya in particular, but also in the Southern Africa Development Community. In 97 sites here, we are engaged in collection and reporting of data using a mobile application platform. We've seen a lot of value in that, and we would want to continue to scale that up. And in particular, with the supporting of the CSO platforms such as Swayo Tuna, which is in the Southwest Indian Ocean, and supporting them to really to put an expression of interest forward so that they become admitted as observers. That is also important, also in line with the fact that we need to have most of these communities and organizations more represented at the table. And of course, regulatory gaps. I mentioned that we have several regulatory gaps, which we also need to fill so that we can make sure that transparency becomes more front and center. Capacity, definitely making sure we build the capacity, as Sunitha has said, of those who do not have all these tools. And I think I mentioned earlier that we applaud, of course, the efforts that the EU has taken, but also in their new programming that's coming up in Sub-Saharan Africa, the Pescao in West Africa, and the Ecofish in Eastern Africa, Indian Ocean, and Southern Africa, to see more and more of the things that the ambassador has talked about today, incentives and others, included in those programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. And now a question from the floor from Luca to the ambassador, where he's asking if you think I think what he's trying to say is a more comprehensive regional approach could be taken, and would it be beneficial? I think we know the answer, but I want to put the question to you, Ambassador, if that's okay.
I mean, obviously, fisheries doesn't know a border. There is no border anyway. So we are talking about the ocean. I was saying earlier, in the Gulf of Guinea, which is a vast area, 37% of illegal fishing is taking place. So yes, I think it's very important that countries are working together, they're exchanging information, that the EU is working them. We do that, and I think it's crucial that there's a coordinated approach. It is almost impossible for a single country, and the colleague from Ghana was mentioning it as well. It's almost impossible for one country to control waters in that way. So it requires a very, very coordinated approach. And I think it is important that people are working together. Same is valid for data exchange. There might be data available in one region, in one country, but not in the other country. It's important that this data is exchanged, that it's put together, and it gives a more complete picture of what's going on in an entire region like Gulf of Guinea, but could be any other region as well. Only then we will really get a more global picture. We will have an idea who is fishing where, what are the catches. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We are coming close to the end of our time. And so what I would like to do now is ask each of our panelists if they could give us just 1 or 2 sentences to highlight the key message they would like our audience to take away with them today. We really do have to be brief, so I'll race us through this if that's okay. And perhaps I could start with you, Nana Solomon. Do you have one key message you would like the audience to hear and take away with them?
Yes, thank you, Steve. I think the major message for this platform is that small-scale fisheries, as important as it is, cannot afford to fail, and that it is too big to be ignored, considering its job, food security, and ultimately national security. And therefore, globally, all hands should be on deck to sustain the small-scale fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perfect. Sunitha, may I ask you?
Thanks, Steve. I'll keep this brief with the interest of time, but I just want to reiterate what I had earlier said, is that marine restoration is completely meaningless without ensuring that these regions are sustainably fished. We do need specific attention given to restored habitats for sustainable fisheries. And I'd love to have everyone's help to help put me out of a job one day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perfect, and a very important point. Alice, may I now ask you?
Yes, thank you very much. So transparency with inclusive management and key stakeholders, a coordinated approach. I think we've talked about that, and that's why we are working for us with Southwest and Indian Ocean organizations together. Co-management as well is also something that we can think about. And of course, more importantly, it is the communities and the fishermen being at the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Transparency, coordinated approach, and co-management in the communities. I think it says it all. Ambassador, you have the last word, if I can hand over to you.
Thanks a lot. But first of all, I really would like to underline the issues of transparency and inclusive management are for everybody. It's not for us here. It's not, as was said, for an elite. It's not for the fishermen. It's for everybody. Everybody must be on board and must understand that. And the second message I would like to convene is that the EU, and I can talk for myself here in Côte d'Ivoire, will push hard to make transparency the norm. And that's through our programs, through our agreements, but we will push hard, and through our own market, the single market, where a lot of fish is coming from Africa in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. It's hugely encouraging to hear. So now we have, I'm afraid, come pretty much to the end of our time. And I'd like to say thank you once again to our panelists, to the European Commission, European Development Days, for their leadership, for convening this event, and to you, the audience, for your valuable time and interest. I hope you have found this to be useful as well as interesting to you. And thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. So we will now go back to the studio.